Yeah, fire and fire from my hills were shaking. A lot of poetic language say, I got God's attention. He's coming to rescue me. Good. One of the verses that I like was verse 35 in this psalm. He says something had made him great. Something about God had made him great. What was that? His gentleness. His gentleness had made him great. Good thing to think about. Psalm 19, what declares the glory of God? The heavens declare the glory of God. And what is more important than fine gold and sweeter than honey? The law of the Lord. Law of the Lord. Far more important than those things. Psalm 20. What do some people trust in? Verse 7. Some people trust in those chariots and horses, right? But we got to trust in God. A lot of these are just psalms of rejoicing, of deliverance from God. Psalm 21 is like that. Psalm 21 is just so positive about how God had blessed the king. God had blessed David. And what had God done for him starting in verse 3? What are some things that God had done for him? Yep. He says, I asked life from you, and you gave it. That reminds me of what Jesus said when he said, if a son asks for a fish, will he give him a serpent? God gives his people a lot of the times what they ask for. Not always, but a lot of the times he does. He gives us exactly what we need, that's for sure. Psalm 22. This is sometimes called the Psalm of the Cross because there's so much in here about Jesus and his sufferings on the cross. What's the big question, though, that the psalmist begins with that's sort of earth-shattering here? Why have you forsaken me? My God, my God. You know, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, as Christ says on the cross. However, in verse 24, had God really forsaken him? Had God really fully forsaken him? Verse 24. No. He heard. Yeah, so many of these psalms, they begin with, God, where are you at? You've abandoned me. You've left me. And they're talking about how they feel. At the end of the psalm, they let you know, I know God's never left. I mean, God's always been there. He's heard me. And I see that as kind of Jesus' cry on the cross. He's entering into that human side of things. There you go, spoiler alert. All right, Chuck, here's your favorite psalm here. Psalm 23. What are the things that God does for the psalmist as his shepherd? He restores my soul. Leads him in the paths of righteousness. Yep. Where does he make him lie down? Green pastures, yeah. Even though he walks through the valley of the shadow of death, what's he going to do? Not going to fear any evil. What has God prepared for him? A table in whose presence? Ooh, this is good. In the presence of his enemies. Yeah, just such a rich psalm there. Psalm 24. I'm going to just with this one ask the question that the psalmist asked. Who is this King of glory? Who is he? He's the Lord Lord strong and mighty, Lord mighty in battle. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. Psalm 25. He wants God to remember His tender mercies and His loving kindness. What does he not want God to remember? Yeah. Sins of my youth. Do not remember the sins of my youth. Yep. Take them away. Psalm 26. This is the psalm of, I would say, very important word here. He says, I've walked in my what? Integrity. This is the psalm of integrity. The psalmist of a man walking in integrity. He describes himself much like the man in that first psalm. He did not walk in he hadn't sat with idolatrous mortals. He had walked in his truth. He hated the assembly of evildoers. So it's a lot like Psalm 1. What does he love in verse 8? He loves the temple. He loves the habitation of your house, the place where your glory dwells. In chapter 27, a very similar thing. He says one thing he's desired. One thing he's desired. He's going to seek that. What's that? What is it? Dwell in the house of the Lord, to behold the beauty of the Lord, to inquire in His temple. Psalm 28. Psalm 28. Another psalm of rejoicing, but also crying out for help. What does he not want God to... He asked God not to do something, verse 3. Don't drag me off with the wicked. Yeah, give them according to their deeds, but save me. And then why should the Lord be blessed in verse 6? Once again, like a lot of these other psalms. Lord heard him when he cried out. All right, Psalm 29. There's something that does a whole lot of things. Breaks the cedars, splinters Lebanon, makes him skip like a calf, makes the deer give birth, does a whole bunch of things. What is it that does all that? The voice of the Lord. It's a psalm about the power of God's voice and what it does. All right. Psalm 30. Says a song at the dedication of the house of David. Interesting header there. So, what's temporary? He says there's some things that are temporary. In verses 4, really 5, verse 5. What's temporary? His anger. His anger is but for a moment. What's for life, though? His favor is for life. What's going to only endure for a night? Weeping. But joy comes in the morning. So, this is actually pretty common to the psalmists. As he cries out to God and he's wanting God to help him and he's wanting God he's reasoning with God about why he should help him. What question does he ask God in verse 9? It's actually a set of questions, but that's right. That's right. Yep, that's right. It says, I want to be in the land of the living. God, where I can praise you, where I can worship you, where I can do all these things here. He says, will the dust praise you? That's an interesting. And questions like that are kind of common in the psalmists. Okay, they reason with God that way sometimes when they're asking God to deliver them from the pit, deliver them from death. All right, good, very good. And we'll do Psalm 30 through 40 this Sunday. Okay, all right. Let's go ahead and begin with our class tonight. We are on page 19 is where our lesson begins if you want to get out your book. But tonight we're going to be doing the homework, of course, of our maps. So the map that we're doing is, of course, we're on lesson 4, so it's the 4th map in the book, Ancient Egypt. That's what we'll be doing tonight. And so if you want to turn over to that map, if you got your homework ready, we will do that in just a moment. But before we do, Chuck, would you mind leading us in a word of prayer, please, before we begin? Amen. All right, very good. Thank you. So, we're in Egypt tonight. We're talking about Egypt, a lot about Egypt. And let's go ahead to get us up to date here before we do our homework assignment. To just kind of get us up to date with where we're at in the biblical story and that in the arc of the biblical story. Let's read Acts 7:17 through 36. And this will kind of summarize what we talked about last Sunday. So Acts 7:17 through 36. This is Stephen as he's addressing the mob of Jews who are going to kill him and at the end of the chapter. But he's recounting to them and preaching to them, he is recounting to them the history of their people. And in verse 17, it kind of starts talking about God's deliverance from Egypt through Moses. Somebody want to read 17 through, let's see. I want to split this up in two. This is 30. Let's read. Somebody read 17 through 25. That looks like a good place. And then somebody else read 26 through 36. Yep. There you go. Somebody else just finish it out. 36. All right, good. So that sort of summarized what we looked at Sunday, that time period of God's people being in Egypt and that time of fulfillment. And he begins that by saying the time was fulfilled that God told Abraham they're going to be in this foreign land for about 400 years, and then I'm going to lead them out. And they did. God led them out through Moses. They plundered the Egyptian and led them out with. They were led out with great riches and brought them out only to be wandering in the wilderness for 40 years because of their disobedience. We'll talk more about that a little later. But a lot of these events are assembled around this great place in history, this great place in the world of its time, one of the richest places in the world of its time, Egypt. This is a map here of Egypt. This was our homework assignment. Basically, we get kind of an idea of this general area down here. We focus more up north, but now we're kind of centered on the land of Egypt. Of course, what's this big body of water right here? The Red Sea as it comes up. So, this is kind of confusing, but what's this place up here? That's Lower Egypt, and this is Upper Egypt. Why? Elevation. That's right. The Nile River is it's unique in that it's in the northern hemisphere, yet it flows from south to north. And so you have an elevation change, and so that's why you got lower. I got my pointer? Oh, yeah, there we go. I have a pointer right there. Okay, so the sea, all this flows into is what? The Mediterranean Sea. I thought I'd throw this city in here since we're in Tennessee. Where's this? What's this? Memphis. Yeah, there you go. I thought I'd throw that in there since we're in Tennessee. What's this area here? Sinai. We'll talk a good bit about that tonight. This is a question. It's a question whether or not this is the actual place, but what is this place on the map? No, there's this place right here next to this little arm of the Ezion Geber. That's right. I think that was. I knew you'd ask me that. Somebody tell me what's significant about that. Remind me. Mm-hmm. I know it was one of the places that Israel went during the wanderings. It was one of their locations. Okay. All right. Thank you. Cool. Very good. Yep. Good. All right. This city up here, Jerusalem. What about this here? Beersheba. This was an important part in the story of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. These general areas: Hebron, Shechem, Beersheba. All of these find their place in the story of the patriarchs. Let's see here. I think that was all of them. Yep. So, wave my magic wand again and bang, there you go. We can see all of them now. Okay. So this is the general area of the world that we are looking at tonight in the Bible story, where we're at in the Bible story. As I said, this part of the world was one of the greatest of its time. As far as empires of the world, it was number one in the minds of of historians for times in ancient history. It was right up there with Babylon, Assyria, all those great kingdoms, Greece, and so forth. It had its times where it rose and fell, but it was one of the richest places, one of the greatest places to live, really, as far as comfort and abundance is concerned. God actually kind of dealt with that and the plagues somewhat, showed them that they weren't as abundant as they thought they were without Him. One of the things that made this place so abundant and rich is it's a lot like that Fertile Crescent, remember? The Mesopotamia. And what made Mesopotamia so rich, one of the reasons why it made it so rich in fertility is the word I'm trying to say. Good for growing things, good for living there and growing crops and having flocks and herds. The reason why that place was so abundant is because of the rivers that flowed through there, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Well, if you look back here with Egypt, you have a main river channel that flows up through here, the Nile. And the Nile in particular is high in silt deposits. And those silt deposits make the land around it very rich and easy to grow things. They would often, in this part of the world, have multiple harvests a year. And you can see why Egypt then, after everything had failed in the whole world, it was, and this was greatly because of Joseph. Even Egypt during the time of Joseph's time, when there was famine, even they didn't have anything. But all the world came to Egypt for what little the world did have during the famine of that time. So just an abundant place. But it also was rich in its precious metals, its jewelry, its gold, its the finer things of life at that time could be found in Egypt. I just want to show you just a few things. And I kind of did this with Ur. The reason why I did this with Ur, to kind of show you the richness of that territory, was to show you what Abraham gave up, what he left in order to go to the place where God gave him. Egypt's just full of gold and silver and many such like. This is a beautiful specimen in one of the museums in Cairo, Egypt. I learned putting this together. Egypt's one of those museum places. Like if you're a museum person and you're in Egypt, you have to visit some of the museums in Egypt. There's just some beautiful things there. This is the mask of Tutankhamun. I probably messed that up, but these Egyptian names, they had their own syllabolic way of pronouncing things. And a lot of these things I'm going to show you is from what they consider to be the 12th dynasty. Sometimes they refer to it as the first dynasty, the first great dynasty, but they refer to it, not the 12th, the 18th dynasty. And this dynasty, this time period here where a lot of these things I'm showing you tonight are from, is thought to be around the time period that God's people were in Egypt and around the time of the Exodus. So I've picked some things sort of in and around this time period. Just a beautiful piece of artisanship. It's just magnificent. The detail, the quality of gold in this thing. It's just blue, yeah, blue. That is a good question. I tell you what, look it up. Look it up. Look it up. And it could be that word that I was pronouncing last time. So anyway, there you go. Yeah, lapis lazuli. Yeah. I threw this one in here. I thought y'all would like this. And I want to make a point with this because y'all know what that is? And my flip-flops made out of what? Gold. Gold. Okay. Who'd these belong to? Y'all. Once you know like who these belong to, it gets interesting. So this belonged to one of the 3 minor wives, is what they're called. Minor wives of Thutmose III, who is, by the way, Thutmose III is one of the popular options for the Pharaoh of the Exodus. We don't know who the Pharaoh of the Exodus was. We really don't. There's some popular ideas. But these sandals were found in the tomb of what they call the 3 minor wives of Thutmose III. So the minor wives of Thutmose III were walking around in gold flip-flops. Well, they probably weren't doing this all the time. You got to understand, this is like a status symbol. When it comes to being a status symbol, it doesn't matter if it's comfortable or not. I guarantee you they didn't wear these probably all the time. That would have hurt. But the reason why I show you this is it just gives you an idea of just the richness that these people found themselves in. Especially if you were high up in the Egyptian government, you were high up in that system, if you were part of that royalty, understand what riches you had access to. Now, who in the story could have had access to all that we've been talking about? Moses, yeah. Being brought up by Pharaoh's daughter. I mean, just... Yeah, go ahead. I'll get it. Yes. Yes. We're going to talk more about in this next slide here. I'm going to get right back to that point on this next one. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it's just unbelievable the wealth that's represented here. This is a beautiful this is called a pectoral image of some bird, and this is made out of a whole bunch of things. All right, but this is partly made of electrum. Y'all know what electrum is? Electrum. Electrum is when you take, either nature takes it, and it's found in nature, or you can do this. You can do this with certain technology as well. This is a mixture of gold and silver. It's an alloy of at least 80 parts gold, 20 parts silver, and there was sometimes traces of other things like copper in it. Electrum is sometimes found in nature, sometimes naturally occurring, but people make a strong case that the people of the ancient past knew how to make this stuff. And people believe that the Egyptians knew how to make this stuff. In fact, there's papyrus that they found with lists of, ingredient lists to make alloys of certain amount of gold, certain amount of silver. And this goes right back to the point that you just made, Chris, is these people were intelligent. All right? Yeah. There you go. Okay, good. Started going north. Good. Yeah, if the map is correct. All right, good. So, once again, not only rich in these materials, but there's a lot of intelligence. Just look at the pyramids. I mean, people who have studied the pyramids and are really honest really don't know how these things were built. I mean, people have ideas of how they built those things, but we really don't know. So, yeah. That's right. Yep. right? And that's probably exactly what happened. They come up with this all these things that they made. Somebody read Hebrews 11:24 through 26. This is a good point, I think, in the class tonight to read this one. Hebrews 11:24 through 26. No, that's it. That's good. So Moses esteemed reproach desiring greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. And that shows you something about Moses' faith. He didn't just have faith when he was out there in the wilderness many years later and God called him. All right? Even, when he's having that confrontation with the Egyptian and those fellows of his that were fighting, it's like he was already starting to go, okay, this or this. I have a choice, and I choose this. I choose my people. I choose God's people. I choose reproach. And, he could have had it all as far as the world's standards are concerned. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. And he had that choice before him. Yep. Oh, the choices that sometimes are presented before us. Oh, the choices. We need to be wise. We need to be wise in the choices that we make and not have eyes for the world in those choices. Moses had eyes for his people and for God. And he saw riches that were greater than what was in Egypt. One of the things that made Egypt so great, another thing that made them great, was their industry. They had many different types of craftsmen. This is a beautiful piece of work. This is found in Rekhmire's tomb. And Rekhmire was the governor of Thebes in his day, around 1400, 1350 BC. And this picture is found drawn on the wall in his tomb that they found. And there's all sorts of different industries being represented here, from bread making. You see there's a basket of grain here. There's different types of pottery that they're making. A lot of people think this is some type of tapestry or leather making up here. There's a lot of different craftsmanship represented here. But here on the bottom, kind of going back to our story, what does it look like these people are making here? Yeah. So there's another angle of this. I found another picture of another angle that really shows this. Look at this stack of bricks right here. This right here looks like a kennel, the fire I'm in, and so forth. And they stack them up, and people here are carrying them off. So there's a process that's being told here. And of course, God's people, the way that they play into that is that's the occupation that was given to them forcibly. They were made slaves to make bricks, and that's the hardship that was put on them at that time. Now, one of the things that's interesting around this period of time, this 18th dynasty, you know, God's people were in Egypt at some period of time, 400 years. You'd think in that period of time that something about them rubbed off on the Egyptians. And there could be evidence for that. I wanted to show y'all this. This is really interesting. I don't think I could go through any archaeology on Egypt without showing you this. Y'all know who Nefertiti is? Y'all ever heard of Nefertiti? And her husband is Akhenaten, a great pharaoh in Egypt in this dynasty that we're talking about, the 18th dynasty, one of the great dynasties of Egypt. What makes these individuals unique is that
right during his reign, all of a sudden, without any people before him having this idea, or anybody after him having this idea, he's called the heretic king for a reason. He decided that there was one God. One. Or, now some people disagree a little bit with that. They say, well, he believed there was one supreme God, that you only needed to worship one. There's kind of some variation. But the God that they worshiped, they called him Aten. Aten. And Aten is represented by a sun. And here is a pictograph of them and their daughters here. Nefertiti and Akhenaten here. And God is shining his rays on them. This supreme God here they call Aten. One of the things, there's these symbols represented around these sunbeams. One of them, these symbols, looks like a little cross with a loop in it. That is called an Ankh. An Ankh. I think you got to put that H in there at the end. That's the Egyptian symbol for eternal life. And so Aten is represented here as blessing them with eternal life. I find that interesting. Is this evidence of possibly the Hebrew ways rubbing off on an ancient pharaoh? Who knows? But I find it interesting to show you guys. Now, as far as the pharaoh of the Exodus is concerned, like I said, there's a lot of different players that people come up with, but here's some of the heavy hitters as far as who people think could be the pharaoh of the Exodus: Amenhotep II, Thutmose III, and Ramses II. People make a big case for Ramses II. That may be one of the ones that you've probably heard being proposed as the pharaoh of the Exodus, because somebody read Exodus 1 and verse 11. Exodus 1 and verse 11. It actually tells you of some of the places that the people in their slave building built. Pithom and Ramses, yeah. So some people look at that and they think, well, maybe they're building this city after the name of Pharaoh, or at least maybe a pharaoh of the past. So, thing I want us to think about here, are one of these men the man who said, "Who is Jehovah that I should obey his voice?" Whoever it was, didn't turn out too well for him, did it? Whoever it was. They learned more than they wanted to learn, and God's people were set free. And when God's people were set free, another thing that's questioned, there's a lot of things about this that we don't know. One of the things we don't know about this is where exactly the Red Sea crossing was, and where Mount Sinai is. We don't really know that for sure, although there are some proposed locations. Some people think they crossed on this arm. Some people think they come all the way up here and crossed down around this area. We just don't know for sure. People make different cases for that. But I wanted to show you a couple of pictures here as we wrap up of this area of the world that they were wandering in, that they found themselves wandering in. Yes, they were slaves in Egypt. But as we saw tonight, they were slaves in a very rich place. And they went from that place to wilderness. This is the Red Sea here. Notice the background. Notice that back there, if you could see that far back there. That's just nothing but wilderness back there as far as the eye can see around the Red Sea. This is the wilderness of Sinai. This is one of the proposed locations of Mount Sinai, or a picture taken from one of the proposed places of Mount Sinai called Jabal Musa. Just notice how barren this place is. Do you see maybe why they had a hard time coming out of of what they came out of, and now they're faced with nothing. If God didn't send them manna and quail, they're toast, buddy. God took care of them during that 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And it's hard to find water out here too, and you've got a host that went out of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, of a mixed multitude that went out, and they were sent out in haste because the Egyptians were like, hey, you need to get out of here. We're all going to be dead if they don't leave. And they gave them riches. They gave them many riches, gold, silver, jewels. That's how they built the golden calf. That's how they built the tabernacle. From all the things the Egyptians gave them. But you know what? They found themselves wanting to go back. Time and time again in their rebellious hearts. I'm going to pick up here and kind of finish my thought. Michael's asked me to do the invitation tonight because Courtney's not feeling well, so I thought I would just sort of finish my train of thought here with the invitation. But they wanted to go back. After all that God had done for them, they wanted to go back. They daydreamed of their life as slaves in Egypt. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. Thank y'all very much. We're on Lesson 5 Sunday. As always, do the questions for Lesson 5 on Sunday.
Pressing on the upward way, new heights I'm gaining every day. So praying as I onward go, Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand, like faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane that I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. My heart has no desire to stay where doubts arise and fears dismay. Who'll some way dwell where these abound? My prayer, my aim is higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand, by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane that I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. I want no scale the utmost high and catch a gleam of glory bright. But some I'll pray till heaven I'll found. Lord, lead me on to higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane that I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground.
All right. Yeah, thank you. That'll be the only chart. You can just go back to the song after that one, because that's the only one I'm going to have. All right. Good to see everybody tonight. So I was asked to do the invitation tonight. Michael had to stay home to look after her. But as you can see before you on the screen, this is one of the things that we talked about in our class this evening. For those of you who weren't in here, was the wilderness. We kind of left off with this. The wilderness that God's people faced when they came out of Egypt. It's been about 400 years in captivity in Egypt and hard labor. But even though they had hard labor in Egypt, they had access to some great things. Even as slaves at that time, and they talk about that. They kind of salivate over that and wanting to go back to Egypt sometimes, and what they talk, even though it was so miserable for them, they had their sustenance taken care of. There were some things they did not have to worry about that they would now have to be faced with as they're wandering in the wilderness. I find it interesting that as God's people find their way out of Egypt, they're like Abraham. They're like Abraham. They're going to a place that they know nothing about. They're being called from a land that is rich in abundance, and even though they're slaves, once again, the place that they're being called from is rich in abundance in culture and agriculture and industry. And they're going to this land, but what lies in between them and the land that they're going to inherit is barren wilderness. Miles and miles and miles of nothing. Hundreds of thousands of people, some say maybe over in the millions of people, that went out with flocks and herds, with abundance of possessions. They go out into this wilderness. And one of the reasons why I believe God did that is He did that to test them. I mean, first of all, that's how the land is laid out. But God leads them through this wilderness in order to test them, to try them, to see if they got faith, to see if they're going to trust Him, to carry them through this wilderness to the land that they're going to possess. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 1 through 5, God talks about how He tested them, about how He tried them, so that they would know something about Him. He says, "Every commandment which I command you today you must be careful to observe, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to your fathers. You shall remember that the Lord your God led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble you and to test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep His commandments or not. So He humbled you and allowed you to hunger and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that He might make you know that man shall not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. Your garments did not wear out on you, nor did your foot swell these 40 years." I wonder if any of them had realized that up until the point that He said that. Look, your garments didn't wear out. Did you notice that your feet didn't even swell? This whole time as you've been wandering around in the wilderness, God's been with you. But He let you hunger. He let you go through this wilderness that you would know you got to live off of what He says, His Word, not just bread alone. In verse 5, you should know in your heart that as a man chastens his son, so your Lord chastens you. And so He did in the wilderness. He tested their faith, whether or not they had any. And when it came right down to it, they were faithless. At least that first generation, they were a bunch of complainers. They were a bunch of mockers. They were a bunch of troublemakers as they constantly complained against Moses for leading them through this wilderness, bringing them out there to die. They longed to go back to Egypt, as we pointed out at the end of the class. And it wasn't just God who tested them. They did their share of testing God. In Hebrews chapter 3, as the Hebrew writer is teaching us the importance of faith, because it's the foundation of everything. He says in Hebrews 3 and verse 7, therefore as the Holy Spirit says today, if you will hear His voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion in the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tested me and tried me and saw my works 40 years. Therefore I was angry with that generation, saying, they always go astray in their heart, and they have not known my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. And then the Hebrew writer goes into why they couldn't enter His rest, why they couldn't enter into Canaan. He says, beware, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God, but exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. For we have become partakers of Christ if we hold to the beginning of our confession steadfast to the end. While it is said today, if you will hear His voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. For who having heard rebelled? Indeed, was it not all who came out of Egypt led by Moses? Now with whom was He angry 40 years? It was not with those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? To whom did He swear that they would not enter His rest? But to those who did not obey? So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. Unbelief. God brought them out into this wilderness, and He wanted them to just trust Him and do what He said. But they wouldn't do it. And they lied dead to this day as dust and ashes out here in this barren wilderness somewhere where their corpses fell. And they lie out there in this barren wilderness as an example to me and you. Unbelief brings death. Brings death. Faith is everything. It's the foundation of everything that we do. If we don't have faith, we're nothing but dust and ashes. And we're called from this passage today, if you hear His voice, if you hear the reader of this, if you hear His voice, don't harden your heart. See what happened to all the people who fell in the wilderness because of their lack of faith. Put your trust in God. See what He did for the next generation and all those generations to come, that even though they weren't perfect and even though they many times struggled with their faith and their trust in God, God still had a plan. He led those people eventually into the promised land. He fulfilled all of those promises to them, and He left all of these things down as an example for us that we can know who to put our trust in. So beware. Beware of unbelief. Beware of an evil heart of unbelief and departing from the living God. And if you're here tonight and you need to put your trust in the Lord and you have not yet begun to do so, understand who God is. That if you put your trust to Him, He will give you more than anything you could possibly imagine through all the ages of eternity. But we have to put our trust in Him, and it all starts somewhere. And it starts with that faith and that confession in our heart that Jesus is Lord, Romans 10:10. It starts with that repentance in our heart, turning from our sin. And that place where we go down as that old man and come up as that new man in faith is in baptism. Romans 6, verses 4 through 3 tells us we're buried with Him in baptism into death. That just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we should walk in newness of life. You can have that new life tonight, walking in faith. If we can help you to do that, won't you come as we stand, as we
day coming by and by, when the saints and the sinners shall depart, I know and let. Are you ready for that day to come? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? There's a bride day coming, a bride day coming. There's a bride day coming by and by. But its brightness shall only come to them that love the Lord. Are you ready for that day to come? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? There's a sad day coming, a sad day coming. There's a sad day by and by, when the sinners shall depart. I know you not. Are you ready for that day to come? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day?